The morning light poured like liquid gold over the snow-capped ridges of the Rocky Mountains. Denver International Airport buzzed with its usual rhythm, luggage wheels clattering, coffee machines hissing, boarding calls echoing across the terminal. In Gate C-23, passengers lined up for Flight 228, bound for Washington, D.C. It was supposed to be an ordinary trip, another unremarkable day in the skis. Captain Mark, a man in his late 50s with graying hair and a confident smile, greeted passengers as they entered the cockpit. 22 years of flight experience had made him calm to the point of predictability, the kind of man who'd seen it all and carried the air of someone who never panicked. His co-pilot, First Officer Jenna Moore, younger and meticulous, checked the flight systems with the quiet focus of a musician tuning before a concert. "Winds at altitude look smooth today," said, adjusting his headset. "We might even beat the schedule." Moore smiled. "Let's hope the passengers appreciate the free time." In the cabin, people shuffled into their seats, wrestling with carry-ons and headphones. Business travelers typed away on laptops, parents tried to calm their children, and a few dozed off even before takeoff. But one passenger, seated quietly in 14C, seemed detached from the ordinary hum of the plane. His name, printed in small letters on his boarding pass, was Cole. He looked mid-40s, fit but tired, the kind of tired that came from something deeper than lack of sleep. His short-cropped hair and calm posture made him seem military, though his plain jacket and jeans gave away nothing. He stared out the window as the plane taxied to the runway, his reflection gliding across the glass like a ghost. When the engines roared to life, the vibration hummed through the cabin. Some passengers gripped their armrests nervously, but barely blinked. He'd heard that sound too many times before, though not from a commercial jet. The plane climbed steeply, slicing through a sea of soft white clouds. The captain's voice came over the intercom, warm and steady. "Good morning, ladies, and this is your captain speaking. We've reached 10,000 feet heading east over the Rockies. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." The signs flicked off. Flight attendants began their practice dance, pouring coffee, offering snacks, reassuring nervous flyers. A soft murmur filled the cabin, laughter, the clinking of cups, a baby's cry. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. Reclined slightly, eyes half closed, trying to block out the chatter. But the altitude always did something to him. It stirred memories he tried to bury. He could still feel the heavy pressure of a flight helmet against his temples, the vibration of jet engines beneath him, the cold air of 40,000 feet when the canopy glass shimmered with distant lightning. He hadn't planned to be here. He wasn't supposed to fly again. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small metal token, an Air Force Challenge coin. Its edges were worn smooth, the emblem barely visible. He turned it over once, twice, and then slipped it back before anyone could see. Across the aisle, a teenage boy with headphones caught sight of him and smiled. "You look like a pilot," the boy said, grinning. Gave a polite smile back. "Used to be," he replied softly. Outside, the clouds began to thin, revealing vast mountain ranges stretching endlessly below. The light was bright, too bright, the kind that makes you squint even through thick windows. In the cockpit, the crew chatted lightly about baseball scores and weather patterns on the East Coast. Everything was smooth, normal. But normal never lasts long at 30,000 feet. A subtle vibration rippled through the plane, the kind most passengers never notice. Jenna checked her readings, nothing unusual, a minor shift in air pressure. She adjusted the trim and looked at Captain, who was scribbling in his logbook. "You ever notice," he said absently, "how quiet it gets up here? Almost feels like you could hear yourself think." She smiled, "Or hear the passengers snore." He chuckled, leaning back in his seat. The hum of the engines filled the silence again. For a long moment, the cockpit was calm, until the captain's pen slipped from his hand. He frowned, bent to pick it up, and froze halfway. His breathing hitched, a sharp intake of air. "Captain?" Jenna asked, glancing up. He didn't answer, his eyes unfocused. His body sagged. The pen rolled off his knee, clattering to the floor. "Captain." The plane continued forward, autopilot holding steady. But in that single instant, the illusion of safety, the comforting hum of normality, shattered completely. Back in row 14, Cole's eyes snapped open. He didn't know why, maybe instinct, maybe muscle memory, but something inside him felt the shift. He straightened, scanning the aisle as a tense stillness fell over the cabin. Over the intercom came a voice, shaky and uncertain. "Ladies and," Jenna said, her voice barely steady, "if there's a doctor, please come to the cockpit immediately." Closed his eyes for a brief second. The peaceful flight was over. The skis had just called him back. Captain Body slumped forward with a sickening finality. His headset fell sideways, tangled in his hair, and the pen he had been scribbling with rolled across the cockpit floor, forgotten. First Officer Jenna Moore froze for half a heartbeat, then sprang into action. "Captain Mark," she shouted, her voice sharp but trembling. The autopilot hummed obediently, maintaining altitude and heading, but that small mechanical reassurance did little to calm the rising panic. In the cabin, a ripple of unease spread like a virus. Passengers glanced at each other, whispers rising. "Is he okay?" someone asked. A mother gripped her child's arm. A businessman pushed back his glasses, staring at the cockpit doors. The plane was high over the Rockies, isolated and vulnerable. If the captain could not continue, the consequences would be catastrophic. Jenna tried to move him, but was heavy, limp. She pressed the intercom button, voice shaky but professional. "Flight attendants, we need medical assistance in the cockpit immediately. Any doctor, please respond." Her words bounced through the cabin, creating an almost surreal echo against the dull roar of the engines. The flight attendants reacted instantly, weaving through the aisles with practiced urgency, scanning every seat. One began asking questions, checking for medical personnel among the passengers. Most shook their heads or whispered apologies. Then came a small, steady voice from mid-cabin. "I can help." All heads turned. It was seat 14C Cole. Calm, deliberate, confident. The quiet man who had barely spoken to anyone on the flight now rose slowly, as though gravity itself obeyed his command. His hands didn't tremble, his gaze didn't waver. There was no hesitation, no fear, only the awareness of a moment that demanded action. Flight attendants parted to allow him passage, casting nervous glances toward the cockpit. A passenger whispered, "Who is that guy?" Another muttered, "He looks like he knows what he's doing." Reached the cockpit door and slid it open with a smooth motion. Jenna looked up at him, eyes wide with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "Can you fly?" she asked, her voice steady now because she had no choice. Paused, assessing the situation. Captain was unconscious, breathing shallow but stable. He nodded slightly. "I can," he said simply. The passengers in the front rows craned their necks, catching glimpses of him as he entered the cockpit. The cabin grew quiet, the tension thick enough to taste. Outside, the mountains stretched endlessly beneath a pristine blue sky, but inside the plane, time had slowed. Every second was amplified, every heartbeat audible. His hands moved over the controls with precision. He checked the autopilot, adjusted the trim, and steadied the altitude. "Cabin pressure's fine. Engines are stable," he reported aloud, more to himself than anyone else. Jenna glanced at him, stunned by his calm, competent demeanor. Her earlier panic began to ease slightly as she realized this stranger might just be their only lifeline. From the intercom, a young flight attendant's voice trembled. "Please, sir, can you do something?" His eyes swept the cockpit instruments, his mind calculating every variable with the speed of someone who had spent years in the skis. "We need to stay calm," he instructed. "Move passengers away from the cockpit. Keep the aisles clear. Call medical if necessary." As he spoke, an eerie stillness filled the cabin. Passengers stared out the windows, gripping seats, clutching hands, whispering prayers. Children sensed the tension, quieting under their parents' arms. Above the Rockies, the plane continued its climb, engines roaring, yet inside, fear and hope collided like storm clouds. For a long moment, the hum of the engines was the only sound, broken only by the occasional cough or nervous whisper. Then straightened, scanning the cabin one last time before gripping the yoke firmly. The quiet man in 14C had become the unlikely guardian of everyone aboard Flight 228. And above, at 30,000 feet, the ordinary flight had already transformed into something extraordinary. Cole's hands moved across the controls with the fluid certainty of a man who had spent years flying at the edge of possibility. The cockpit, once a place of calm routine, now hummed with tense energy. First Officer Jenna Moore watched, a mixture of awe and disbelief on her face as he stabilized the plane. Captain lay slumped, unconscious, his breathing shallow but steady. "Cabin pressure normal, engine steady," muttered almost under his breath. Then louder he addressed Jenna, "Check the autopilot, set it to maintain current heading. We'll keep altitude at 30,000 until we assess." Jenna obeyed, her fingers shaking slightly as she followed his instructions. She had flown with for years and had never witnessed such composure under stress. There was something about this man, quiet, deliberate, calm, that suggested experience far beyond the ordinary. In the cabin, the passengers sensed the shift immediately. The earlier murmurs of fear were replaced with anxious curiosity. Who was this man who walked into the cockpit and instantly assumed command? Some whispered, speculating about doctors, pilots, or retired Air Force personnel. Children clung to their parents, sensing that something serious was unfolding, while adults held their breath, waiting. Glanced at the instruments, noting a slight deviation in heading caused by turbulence over the Rockies. "We need to radio air traffic control," he said. His voice was calm but authoritative. Jenna nodded, picking up the microphone. "Flight 228 to Denver Center, request emergency assistance. Captain incapacitated." Static crackled over the radio. Then a voice came, clipped and professional. "Flight 228, say again. Emergency." "I am taking control of Flight 228. Captain is unconscious," replied. His tone was steady, but it carried an unfamiliar authority. The controller paused, then asked for his name and credentials. Hesitated. His past flashed briefly before him, missions he had flown in secret, years spent as a top-tier fighter pilot, the call sign he had once been known by. It was a name that still resonated in military circles, though it had been buried in classified files. Finally, he said clearly, "Call sign Spectre. I'm a trained pilot. Request immediate clearance and guidance." A stunned silence followed over the radio. In the command center, voices faltered, alarms blinked, and someone whispered almost incredulously, "Spectre, he's alive." Back in the cockpit, ignored the momentary shock and focused on the plane. "Prepare for turbulence over the next few miles," he said. "Cabin crew, secure passengers and keep everyone calm. We're maintaining current altitude until we stabilize." Jenna's voice softened. "How do you know all this?" Didn't answer immediately. Instead, he adjusted the throttle, monitored the instruments, and assessed the weather patterns. Then finally he said, "Experience. You learn to keep calm when everything else is falling apart." The plane rocked slightly as pockets of turbulence hit. Outside the windows, the Rockies stretched endlessly, rugged and silent. Below, valleys and rivers glimmered in the sunlight. Inside, the passengers clung to hope, sensing that their survival now rested in the hands of a stranger. Ran through emergency checklists in his mind. Engine performance, altitude, fuel levels, cabin pressure, autopilot stability. Everything was normal, yet nothing felt routine. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down, heavier than any turbulence or mechanical fault. Every life aboard Flight 228 was tethered to his ability to act decisively. Finally, he turned to Jenna. "We need to coordinate with ATC for an emergency landing. Stay calm. Follow my instructions." She nodded, realizing she had just witnessed something extraordinary. A man who had entered a routine commercial flight and instantly became its guardian. The hum of the engines and the gentle vibration of the plane became a backdrop to an invisible tension, a storm of nerves, skill, and resolve concentrated in the cockpit. Passengers in the cabin, sensing the authority in his voice, whispered among themselves, "Who is he?" A retired pilot, military. Their fear remained, but it was tempered now by a glimmer of trust. High above the Rockies, at 30,000 feet, Flight 228 was no longer a routine flight. It had become a test of skill, nerve, and human courage, and the man in 14C, now in the cockpit, was ready to meet it head-on. For the first time, the plane was under complete control, but outside, invisible eyes were already watching. The name echoed across the radio channels like a bolt of lightning. "Spectre," the controller repeated, disbelief coloring his tone. In the NORAD operations room, young officers froze mid-command. Alarms blinked as someone double-checked the database. Could it really be him? The pilot, the ace fighter known for impossible missions and classified rescues, was alive. And now, aboard a civilian jet, he had just assumed control in a crisis. High above the Rockies, Cole's Spectre remained focused. He had not come to make a statement. The passengers and the co-pilot needed him alive, and that alone commanded his full attention. Yet he felt the weight of the legend that had preceded him. Every decision, every adjustment of the yoke, carried with it the unspoken history of his past missions. Flight 228 maintained current heading. ETA for DC approach in 90 minutes. Confirm emergency status, the controller said, voice steady despite the shock. "Confirmed," replied, his tone calm, precise. "Captain remains unconscious. Autopilot engaged temporarily, but I am manually monitoring all systems. We require an emergency escort to ensure safety." The response was immediate. NORAD scrambled 2 F-22 Raptors from Air Force Base. These cutting-edge jets sliced through the clouds at supersonic speed, climbing rapidly to intercept Flight 228. The pilots of the Raptors exchanged astonished glances. "You hear that?" one said over the radio. "Spectre, that call sign, it can't be." "Check your visual identification," the other replied. "Eyes on target in 5 minutes." Inside the cockpit of Flight 228, Jenna Moore glanced nervously at Spectre. "That's your call sign?" she asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer. He didn't smile. "It's the only one I ever used in the air. It carries weight for those who know. For the rest, it's just a name." His eyes flicked to the instruments, scanning the radar feed and confirming altitude. "Right now, it doesn't matter who I am, only that we land safely." Outside, the Rockies stretched in endless ridges, untouched and silent. Yet above the rugged landscape, the hum of military jets cut through the calm sky. The F-22s approached with precision, flanking Flight 228 at a distance that was both protective and intimidating. They mirrored every movement of the commercial aircraft, scanning the horizon for any threat. Inside the operations room, the officers stared at their screens. "He's alive. He's really alive," whispered one young lieutenant. "And he's flying a commercial jet over the Rockies in emergency conditions with F-22s scrambled." The Raptors maintained formation, their pilots communicating in clipped, professional tones. Yet when they heard the calm, authoritative voice of Spectre over the radio, they both froze, memories of old missions flashing through their minds. The man who had been a ghost in the Air Force for years was alive, and he was in control of an aircraft full of civilians. Back in the cockpit, coordinated with the F-22s. "We'll descend gradually over the next 20 miles, he said, eyes sharp. "Adjust heading 3 degrees north to avoid turbulence. Follow me precisely." Jenna followed his instructions without hesitation, watching in awe as the planes flanked them. The passengers, unaware of the full history behind the call sign, felt a new sense of security. There was authority in the calm voice guiding the plane, a confidence that suggested experience beyond measure. The mountain peaks below passed silently, oblivious to the drama above. Inside the cabin, whispers of relief spread quietly. Someone clutched a neighbor's hand. A child peeked curiously out the window, seeing the shadow of the jets flanking their plane. For the moment was quiet yet intense. Every adjustment of the throttle, every glance at the radar, was part of a delicate dance. The call sign Spectre wasn't just a name. It was a symbol of responsibility, of lives entrusted to his skill and instinct. The jets flanking Flight 228 were a testament to the gravity of the situation, not just a civilian emergency, but a military-level coordination. And high above the Rockies, at 30,000 feet, the calm of a routine flight had been replaced by the electrifying tension of legend meeting reality. Spectre was back, and the skis themselves seemed to recognize it. The roar of the F-22 Raptors cut through the clouds, a sound unlike anything the passengers had ever heard. Sleek, angular, and supersonic, the jets flanked Flight 228 with uncanny precision, maintaining perfect distance as if tethered by invisible strings. For Cole's Spectre, the presence of these machines was both a comfort and a reminder of his past. He felt the pulse of the jet's engines in the air around them, a rhythm that echoed the disciplined cadence of his own years in the cockpit. Jenna Moore, seated beside him, could hardly hide her astonishment. She watched as Spectre spoke into the radio, issuing commands with a calm authority that left no room for doubt. Maintain formation at 200 feet above and 20 feet to the left. Adjust heading 3 degrees for wind correction. His voice was steady, precise, the embodiment of experience that even the F-22 pilots recognized. Inside the cabin, passengers were unaware of the full gravity of the situation. Some craned their necks, spotting the shadow of the jets through the small oval windows. Others whispered in awe, noticing the unusual formation. Children pressed their faces to the glass, sensing both fear and excitement, while parents clutched their hands, silently praying. The ordinary hum of a commercial flight had been replaced by an almost electric tension that charged the air. On the radio, the lead F-22 pilot spoke, voice tight but professional. Flight 228, this is Razor 1. Maintaining formation. You're clear for emergency descent. All systems normal on our radar. Nodded slightly, adjusting the throttle. Copy, Razor 1. Descend at a rate of 1,500 feet per minute. Cabin crew, inform passengers of expected turbulence. The plane shuddered as pockets of storm turbulence swept across their path. Lightning flashed faintly in the distance, illuminating the sky in brief, ghostly bursts. Rain began to streak the windows. The autopilot, previously a safety net, now remained disengaged. Every adjustment, every flick of the yoke was manual, deliberate, and precise. Hands moved with the fluidity of muscle memory honed over years of high-stakes missions. The F-22 pilots remained a constant presence on either side of the jet, mirroring its movements, guiding its descent, ensuring that no misstep could threaten the fragile safety of Flight 228. Behind the helmets, their eyes flickered with recognition. The calm, commanding voice on the radio was one they knew well. Spectre, once a legend in the skis, thought gone, was alive, and he was in charge. Inside the cabin, murmurs of fear began to give way to cautious hope. "Who is that guy?" whispered one passenger. "He's amazing," replied another. A mother hugged her child tightly, noticing that while the plane rocked violently, their flight seemed under control. Even as turbulence rattled the windows and the plane pitched slightly, the passengers trusted the stranger in the cockpit. His mind raced through every scenario: wind shear, engine fluctuations, potential system failures. Each contingency was accounted for in seconds, strategies deployed almost instinctively. Razor 1, maintain visual contact and provide vectors for emergency approach to DC runway clearance pending, he commanded. The Raptors responded instantly, guiding Flight 228 like guardian angels. High above the East Coast, their presence was both intimidating and reassuring. The storm clouds thickened as the plane approached the mid-Atlantic, and visibility dropped to near zero. Adjusted the flaps, monitored the instruments, and coordinated with the co-pilot and the F-22 pilots. Every passenger in the cabin, though unaware of the precise military coordination unfolding, could feel the change. Fear lingered, but it was tempered now by the undeniable authority and calm of the man at the controls. Someone whispered softly, "I think we're going to be okay." And for Spectre, the mission was clear. Guide the plane safely through the turbulence, maintain formation with the F-22s, and ensure that Flight 228 reached the East Coast intact. Every heartbeat, every adjustment, every breath counted. In the skies above, legend and reality merged, and the ordinary became extraordinary. The sky darkened rapidly as Flight 228 approached the mid-Atlantic corridor. Thick, black storm clouds gathered like a wall, swallowing the sunlight and casting the cabin into dim, tense shadows. Thunder rolled in the distance, shaking the fuselage with low, rattling booms. Rain lashed against the windows, streaking the glass in chaotic patterns that made the mountains and valleys below almost invisible. Inside the cockpit, Cole's Spectre maintained a calm focus, his hands steady on the yoke, eyes scanning instruments and radar with unwavering intensity. "Expect turbulence in 20 seconds, he warned Jenna, his voice quiet but authoritative. "Hold her steady." The plane pitched violently as the first pocket of turbulence hit, rattling the cabin and sending coffee cups spilling. Passengers gripped their seats, hearts pounding. A child cried softly. A man muttered a string of curses under his breath. Flight attendants struggled to maintain composure, securing trolleys and calming fearful passengers. Outside, the F-22 Raptors sliced through the storm like living shadows, their sleek bodies almost invisible against the roiling black clouds. Their afterburners glowed faintly through the rain, a reassuring beacon of precision. Razor 1 and Razor 2 mirrored every movement of Flight 228, keeping the commercial jet on course, a protective barrier between the chaos of the storm and the lives within. Adjusted the throttle slightly, letting the plane descend at a controlled rate. Autopilot off. Manual control for the remainder of the storm. Flaps at 15 degrees. Speed stable at 260 knots, he instructed. Every word was precise, calculated, a product of instincts honed in years of high-stakes missions. Jenna followed his commands, hands moving quickly yet carefully across the controls. "Spectre, how are you so calm?" she asked, her voice tense. He didn't look at her. "Because panic will kill us faster than the storm. Focus on what you can control. Follow instructions. The rest is noise." The turbulence intensified, forcing the plane to tilt sharply. Lightning illuminated the cockpit, flickering across the control panels and the co-pilot's anxious face. In that fleeting flash, his jaw tightened, eyes flickering with past memories, dogfights over hostile territory, near collisions at supersonic speeds, moments when death had hovered closer than breath. And yet now the stakes were different. The passengers were untrained, vulnerable, relying entirely on him. A sudden jolt rocked the fuselage and a warning light blinked on the control panel, an engine fluctuation, minor but not. Fingers danced over the throttle and switches, compensating immediately. "We're stable. Razor 1, confirm position," he said, voice steady. "Position confirmed. 2 o'clock high, all systems nominal. Continue descent," came the clipped reply. The cabin trembled again. Passengers whispered prayers. Some closed their eyes, silently willing the plane to remain aloft. The flight attendants moved through the aisles, offering reassurances that sounded hollow against the storm but were the only comfort available. Minutes stretched like hours. Kept the plane steady, his mind running calculations faster than anyone could comprehend. Wind shear, gusts, turbulence, fuel consumption, each variable processed and neutralized almost instinctively. Every adjustment of the yoke was a negotiation between the plane, the storm, and gravity itself. Finally, a break in the clouds appeared ahead, a faint gray light signaling calmer air. The F-22s shifted formation slightly, guiding Flight 228 toward the east coast. Exhaled softly, though his vigilance never wavered. "Steady," he instructed. "We're through the worst, but keep focus. Approach clearance still pending." Jenna glanced at him, awe and relief mingling in her expression. "You're amazing," she whispered. He gave a faint nod, eyes fixed on the horizon. "We're not done yet. Storms end, but the landing is what counts." Back in the cabin, whispers of relief spread. The passengers had felt the storm's fury and emerged intact, guided by a stranger whose calm authority had been their lifeline. But the air was still thick with tension, the journey far from over. High above the stormy east coast, Flight 228 pressed onward, escorted by the Raptors. Outside, lightning still flashed and rain fell in sheets, but inside the cockpit, the calm, precise control of Spectre held the plane steady. The ordinary flight had transformed into an extraordinary test of skill, courage, and human endurance, and Spectre was determined to see it through. The runway at National Airport shimmered in the sheets of rain like a silver ribbon, barely visible through the curtain of storm. Flight 228 descended carefully, every foot of altitude gained through precise, deliberate control. Thunder rumbled overhead, lightning flashing intermittently across the darkened sky. Spectre's hands were steady on the yoke, eyes locked on the instruments, reading the radar, wind speeds, and descent rate like an extension of his own senses. "Cabin crew, prepare for emergency landing. Fastened. Brace positions now," he ordered, his voice calm but firm. Jenna Moore adjusted the flaps and monitored the throttle, following his commands to the letter. 2,000 feet, 1,005 steady, she read aloud, her voice a metronome against the chaos outside. Outside the cockpit, the F-22 Raptors maintained formation, slicing through the stormy clouds as guardians. Their engines glowed like twin suns through the rain, keeping the path clear and guiding Flight 228 safely toward the runway. Even at this final stretch, the military presence served as reassurance, a testament to the gravity of the emergency and the stakes of the flight. Passengers clutched each other's hands. Children peered nervously out the windows, seeing the streaking lights of the airport and the shadows of the jets flanking them. The storm's fury still rattled the cabin, yet the calm authority emanating from the cockpit offered a fragile sense of security. Spectre's mind raced with calculations. Wind gusts, runway slickness, weight distribution. Every variable mattered. A fraction too much throttle or a slight misalignment could send the aircraft skidding off the runway. He spoke calmly to Jenna, flaps at full. Reduce speed to 200 knots. Line her up for final approach. We have one shot at this. Jenna's hands trembled slightly, but she followed. "Ready on your mark," she said, glancing at him with trust and awe. The aircraft tilted gently, aligning with the runway lights that glimmered like distant stars beneath the rain. The autopilot remained off. Every movement was manual, a delicate negotiation between pilot and machine. Thunder cracked above, and a gust of wind rocked the fuselage. Spectre adjusted instinctively, banking slightly to counter the drift, guiding the plane with a masterful touch honed over years of combat flying. "Altitude 300, 200, 100, Jenna called. The wheels touched down with a solid, resonant thud, skimming over the wet asphalt. The plane shuddered slightly as it made contact, tires squealing against the slick surface. Spectre kept the yoke steady, countering every wobble, every gust of crosswind. The F-22s flanked the plane until it slowed sufficiently, then peeled away into the storm, disappearing into the sheets of rain. Passengers erupted into muted cheers, tears streaming down faces. Mothers hugged children, men clutched their partners, and a few sat frozen in disbelief, overwhelmed by the narrow escape. Flight attendants moved quickly to reassure and stabilize the cabin, their voices now confident. Spectre guided the plane to a complete stop at the designated gate, shutting down engines with careful precision. He removed his headset, exhaling softly for the first time in hours. His gaze swept across the cabin, passengers alive, terrified but unharmed, and finally landed on Jenna. "You did amazing," she said, voice choked with relief. He gave a faint nod, expression unreadable. "We did it. Everyone made it down safely. That's all that matters." Outside, emergency crews approached, flashing lights reflecting off the wet tarmac. Medics rushed to the cockpit, lifting Captain onto a stretcher. Spectre watched silently as his former colleague was carried away, alive and stable. The passengers began disembarking, some turning to look back at the cockpit, searching for the man who had saved them. Spectre stepped into the dim light of the terminal, blending into the crowd. He didn't seek recognition, applause, or media attention. To him, the mission was complete, the lives of 178 people intact, and the legend of Spectre quietly reaffirmed in the skies. High above the storm, the city lights shimmered like jewels through the rain, calm now, peaceful again. Inside the terminal, families reunited, whispered words of gratitude filled the air. And somewhere in that quiet, ordinary chaos, the man in 14C vanished into anonymity, leaving only the legacy of courage, precision, and unyielding calm that had carried Flight 228 safely home. The rain had eased to a light drizzle as Flight 228 came to a complete stop at the gate. Flashing lights of emergency vehicles illuminated the tarmac, reflecting off the wet asphalt in chaotic patterns. Passengers clutched their belongings, some trembling, some weeping quietly. Flight attendants helped guide them off the plane, offering words of reassurance that now felt genuine, earned by the miraculous landing they had just survived. Inside the cockpit, Captain was being wheeled out on a stretcher, alive, breathing steadily and conscious. His eyes fluttered open as he looked at the faces around him. Relief washed over him in waves, but there was also disbelief. How did we?" He stopped, staring at the empty pilot seat beside him. Cole had already left. Quietly, without fanfare, he had stepped into the shadows of the terminal, disappearing before anyone could reach him. To the passengers, he was a stranger who had appeared in their darkest moment and guided them safely through the storm. To the media, he was a mystery, an enigma whose identity they would never uncover. To the world, he was simply gone, leaving behind only whispers of a call sign that carried immense weight: Spectre. Outside on the tarmac, the two F-22 Raptors that had escorted the flight earlier now took off into the darkening sky, disappearing into the distance. Their pilots had lingered briefly, watching the scene unfold below, then saluted in unison. One of them muttered almost to himself, "Welcome back, sir." The words carried a mixture of awe, respect, and recognition for the man who had been more than a pilot, a legend reborn in a moment of crisis. Inside the terminal, passengers and crew slowly processed what had happened. Some hugged family members, tears streaking down their faces. Others whispered prayers of thanks. News crews crowded around, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. Questions flew. Who was the passenger in 14C? How had he managed to land the plane so perfectly? Why had he disappeared without a word? Flight attendants, exhausted but proud, shared stories in hushed tones. "He didn't panic once," one said. "Not even when the turbulence was at its worst. He just knew what to do." Another nodded, voice trembling. "I've never seen anyone like him." In a quiet corner of the airport, walked steadily, blending into the shadows. No one recognized him, and that was exactly how he wanted it. His uniform was gone, replaced by a simple jacket and jeans. The coins in his pocket, faded and worn, were the only reminders of a past that had shaped him, a past that had saved 178 lives just hours ago. He paused for a moment, watching the city lights shimmer through the lingering rain. He remembered the chaos in the cockpit, the fear in the passengers' eyes, the roar of the engines, the unrelenting pressure of the storm. But he also remembered the clarity of purpose, the feeling of control, and the instinctive calm that had guided him through it all. In that moment, high above the clouds, he had been exactly where he belonged. Later, the story would circulate across news outlets and social media. A mysterious passenger saved a plane in distress, a hero who disappeared as quietly as he appeared. But for Cole, for Spectre, there would be no fame, no recognition. The mission was its own reward, the lives saved its own accolade. As he melted into the crowd, he allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. The legend of Spectre had returned, briefly visible to the world, then gone again, silent, unassuming, and unwavering. Above, the storm clouds cleared, revealing a calm night sky filled with stars. The city hummed quietly below, oblivious to the hero who had passed through, leaving only safety and hope in his wake. For Flight 228, the story would live on, a tale of courage, calm under pressure, and the extraordinary presence of a man whose call sign alone could stop hearts and command attention. Spectre. And somewhere, in the quiet of the terminal, he disappeared into anonymity once more, leaving behind only the lingering certainty that some legends are not meant for recognition. They are meant for action.